If it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, walks like a duck, it probably is an RFP. Hello and welcome. My name is Catherine Corin and I'll be your procurement guide. This week I thought we would talk about the various types of solicitation documents and how acronyms keep getting mixed up. People will call something one thing, but when you start reading through it, it's another thing. So, for example, years ago, people were trying in Canada to avoid Contract A RFPs. So they would issue what is called an expression of interest. But within that document, they were creating binding terms and conditions and awarding a contract, which is not what an expression of interest is. So essentially, they called it one thing but it was another. So they weren't actually avoiding the contract A situation. They were creating an RFP, but calling it something else. And that's only going to confuse things. There's enough acronyms out there for us to start mixing them up. And these things still occur. So I was going to share with you a continuum of the various types of, like the most common types of solicitation documents when they're used, how the risks, the resources, the timelines involved. I'm going to try and play with recording a whiteboard. We'll see how this works out. So let's test how this works. So, of the different types of documents, we have the request for information and expression of interest, which require the least number of resources. It's usually at the early stage information gathering. Then we get into requests for quotes and invitation to tenders, and then into requests for proposals and the lesser complicated negotiated request for proposals, which is called rank and run or consecutive negotiations. And then we get up to the most complicated negotiated RFP, which is the best and final offer process. And then there is another process called the joint solutions procurement, but it's less common, and we won't get into that today. So let's start with request for information, expression of interest. What is its purpose? It is for gathering information. We ask questions of the marketplace, or we're gauging interest and availability from the marketplace. It is just about information gathering. For the request for qualifications, invitation to tender, we are actually going to award a contract, but it's based on the lowest price meeting our specifications. When we get into request for proposals and a negotiated request for proposal rank and run, aka consecutive negotiations, we're actually looking for a solution, and the contract is awarded based on highest score and highest negotiated um, solution. When we get into the negotiated request for proposal best and final offer, there's various stages with shortlisting, and we are doing concurrent negotiations with multiple vendors. In that case, it is the best negotiated solution purchase. So those are the purposes of each of those. So each require a different level of resourcing from your internal resources. And so if we start with a best and final offer negotiated request for proposal, it is high input, high skills, and you need your legal team involved. When you're dealing with the consecutive rank and run negotiated proposal, it's very similar to the request for proposals in that you're only dealing with one vendor at a time. And it's a little more flexible. So it's medium to high for the preparation and evaluation resources required. When we are dealing with requests for quote invitation to tenders, It's a medium input depending on the complexity of what you're buying because it's all specifications based. Lowest price wins. So you are defining the exact specifications that are pass fail. Request for qualifications is a little more informal than an invitation to tender is very formal. So that's how you're defining your requirements, and depending on the complexity, it could be a little harder. Request for information and expression of interest, it's low input. You're asking questions. And the caveat to that, we'll get into the market part. So when we are dealing with the marketplace, um, when we're information gathering, we don't want to make it onerous to the vendor marketplace. So when you're asking questions, so when you're developing, it needs to be simple because they can choose whether it's worth the effort to respond to you or not, to share the market information or express interest. So there's not a lot of incentive for them to respond if it's a very lengthy laundry list of questions with no reward at the end because you're just gathering information. There is no contract being awarded from it. When we get to request for quotes and invitation to tenders, it is it's a mature market with standard offerings. So that's the type of marketplace that you're issuing it to. Like, they're fairly standard offerings. That's why you can just make a list of specifications, pass, fail, lowest price wins. We use the RFPs and the negotiated RFPs when we are looking for uh, rating more than just price. And in these situations, it's a sophisticated market with a very diverse offering. So you're looking for a solution, and you can't just look at it at a price based. You're looking for the best value, best solution for your organization. The BAFO is highly sophisticated due to the legal nature and the ongoing negotiations, best and final offer. And because it is an evolving process, the solutions evolve through the discussions that occur in those best and final offer meetings between the various vendors and the buying organization, which leads me to requirements definition. So in the negotiated request for proposal, you only partially can define the issue and you're seeking input and a solution. So it's great for those situations where you don't know enough to truly define what the solution looks like, but you can kind of say what the problem is and you're seeking an input from the marketplace to help you with more of the requirements definition. And that's where the BAFO comes in because you're having discussions back and forth. We'll do another video on that in a future date to get deeper into negotiated request for proposals. In the RFP and rank and run, you have a problem definition, but you're seeking a solution. And that's why you're evaluating based on rated criteria and not lowest price. You want a solution, you've given the problem definition, and you have your limitations and constraints in there. So it's a little more straightforward than in a BAFO situation where you don't know enough to really box yourself in, for lack of a better phrase, and you need that back and forth discussion. In the RFQ and ITT situation, well defined, and it's pass fail. That's how you're dealing with it. Um, Again, because it's a mature market with a standardized offering, you define your requirements, and the response back is yes, no, yes. Like it's a pass fail, and only those that pass, lowest price wins. And RFI EOI, you're not really defining requirements. You're kind of broadly asking questions about something you need to learn more about before you get to the next stage. Timelines. This is the most critical thing that people ask, and
is part of the reason why we end up with some of these acronyms mixed up, because somebody doesn't want to go through the time and effort of an RFP or negotiated RFP, so they think a request for quote will be quicker. Problem is, if it's not a standardized offering, it's not a mature marketplace, it's not going to work to go on a price-based, simple process. So for your request for information, expression of interest, it's just a matter of creating your questions, posting it with sufficient time for people to respond to your questions or expressing an interest in a future process. It can be a couple of weeks. You're not evaluating, you're obtaining information. And then you're taking that information and determining what your next steps are going to be. The request for quote, ITT, they range in complexity. So it's hard to say whether it's a quick process or a lengthy process. Requests for quotes tend to be fairly informal, fairly quick. It can be just a couple of weeks, whereas an invitation to tender can be a lot more lengthy depending on how complex and how detailed things are for you to evaluate if they meet the requirements. So, we can say 1 to 3 months, depending on complexity. Whereas, I mean, there are ITTs that take much longer. I'm trying to talk about, things that are fairly straightforward. Then when you're talking about RFPs and negotiated RFPs, again, it's going to range depending on complexity. RFPs, for the most part, there is a standard out there that it's 1 month to draft, 1 month to post, 1 month to evaluate. So that is on an average one. Then more complex ones take longer. So we can say an RFP or a straightforward negotiated RFP is 3 to 6 months. Although I have had experience with negotiated RFPs that were rank and run that took a year. Again, it depends on the complexity and the number of stakeholders involved and the marketplace being able to respond without requesting extensions to the process. Then when it comes to the best and final offer, I mean, doubtful you can do it in 6 months, but maybe you can. I would say it's probably more like a year plus from the ones I've seen, because you haven't fully defined your problem, and there are going to be multiple stages for that process, just so that you're aware. So this is, just a very quick overview of some of the things to consider with some of the solicitation processes out there. I mean, I could get into much deeper detail for any one of these in a future video. Please drop a comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to hear more about, more information, and we'll catch you on the next video.